Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you in partnership with my good friends over at Boundless Life. Very literally one of my favorite programs out there that has evolved from this new movement of digital nomads and expat families is Boundless Life. These guys are changing the game for those of you who want to continue exploring the world, but you've brought some little ones into the world as well, and you need to take them along for the ride. They've got education, housing, workspaces, activities, and most importantly, a community of like-minded people who are in a similar situation and just want to keep on exploring. Their locations are set up in some of the most beautiful destinations across Europe, and they are welcoming people for 1, 3, 6, and 12-month programs. So learn more at boundless.life/chase and get $400 off your journey with them when you let them know that you found them through the About Abroad podcast. Boundless.life/chase for more information on Boundless Life. My guest today is my new friend, James Asquith. He is the CEO and founder of Holiday Swap, a company and concept that I'm a huge fan of. And what I found extremely interesting about this particular conversation was the way James's personal story ties directly into the origin story of the company that he's built. He was the youngest person to travel to every single country in the world, literally a Guinness World Record holder for this. And then he used those experiences and the learnings that he took from his travels to build Holiday Swap. It's the inspiration that drives him to this day. And it was fascinating to see those two things unite. So I really enjoyed this one. I took a lot away from it. I really enjoyed getting to know James on a personal level and appreciated his time. So I think you all will as well. Please help me in welcoming James to About Abroad. Yeah, I was doing a little bit of research beforehand. For people listening, they know that I don't really love to do a ton of research before my interviews, especially with people that I haven't met before, which is the case here with you and I. But I did have to dig into you a little bit, and I was shocked to learn. Is it true that you were the youngest person in the world, like an actual Guinness World Record holder for the youngest person in the world to travel to every single country in the world?
That is true. Yeah, that's it seems like a different lifetime ago now for me, but yeah, that was me.
Wow. How old were you when you completed the journey?
I was 24 and a bit at the time, and I think it took about a year and a half for Guinness to actually give me the record, going through everything from receipts and invoices to pictures in front of landmarks. I thought passport stamps would just be enough for them to kind of sign off on it, but I guess not. So yeah, it seemed like a different lifetime ago, honestly.
Wow, that's super young too. I mean, that seems like you're under 25 years old. It seemed like if I set off on that journey today, it would take me that long to do it. You did it at a young age.
Yeah, and it's a lot of people kind of turn around and say, "Oh, you've traveled the world, you've seen it all. Now what?" And joke saying maybe go to Mars. And actually, there was a time when I was being asked about something to do with that went away very quickly. But I genuinely feel like I'm just getting started. Just because you've been to a country, and there kind of became this theme of ticking off stamps in passports, and it was never what I set out to do. I reckon I'd been to maybe 100 countries by the time I thought, hang on, how many are there? Can I go to them? Has anyone done it? And I think when I did I think more people had been on the moon than to every country in the world on record at the time. And then it kind of became a little bit more, I wouldn't say popular, but people started chasing it a bit more and becoming the youngest XYZ, kind of categorizing it into the youngest person hopping through every border. I don't know, whatever it could be. And each to their own. But for me, I still feel like I certainly didn't and haven't touched the surface of going to every country in the world. If you look at the US as an example, right? If going to New York doesn't mean you've been to the US, and I think I've been to 34 states or something now, but there's tons of places I still want to see in the US and any country in general. So yeah, it just really was something that I got a bit carried away with, should we say? And there we were.
Yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying on a much smaller scale, like much smaller scale. I get people that will tell me like, "Oh man, you've traveled so much, you've seen so many places." And the truth is, I guess like style, maybe for lack of a better word, is I haven't really seen all that many countries in comparison to many people, but I've been deep into many countries, and so a handful of countries I've spent multiple months, years in, and really seen some of the nooks and crannies of those countries, and really gotten to know the culture really well, and that's been really fun for me. I think that's the kind of style or the rhythm that I like to go to. But then I see people, like yourself and others who have done hundreds of countries and spent time in these places in these far off corners of the world that I've only like read about or seen pictures of. And I'm sort of envious of that. And I want to do that as well. So I guess there's to each his own, different strokes for different folks. But
I find that cool. I find what you've done even cooler, because when people would ask me and say, hey, tell me about this place or that place, I'm not the expert of anywhere, really. It's there's some places I know better than others, but as you say, you might have spent weeks and months and even longer in some places get to know the culture. And I find that really cool. And I don't think it turned into a little bit of, as I said, this kind of passport stamp chasing from people. And I think it's become a bit unpopular now, if we say it, because I have a lot more, I guess, respect for people that do immerse themselves in a culture. And a lot of that I did was pre-Instagram and, pre-people thinking that they could get sponsored for it. And it was pretty magical in a way. 6-month trips to South America, I reckon I had 50 or 60 photos, in a 6-month trip. And people have that in the space of an hour sometimes these days. It felt like a bit of a different time. I'm almost envious of the time, but I'm certainly envious in some ways of, people getting stuck into actually getting to know and love a place. There's actually a guy that I know, Thor, and he's been traveling, I think, for 8 or so years in one journey, and he hasn't been on a plane in that time. And so, he got stuck during COVID in some of the South Pacific islands, and he's had to get cargo ships between them because it's not like you can get a cruise ship between some of these places thousands of kilometers apart. And so that's really, to me, I look at that and I find that super inspiring, rather than maybe someone that nowadays might get a sponsored trip around the world or something. And that's cool, each to their own. But I still kind of find that the real core rustic traveling, and that's cool to me.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by these people too. I interviewed a guy on this show a couple seasons ago. You've probably met these people on your journeys. Like, he's one of those people that's figured out a very interesting way to see the world, and not just see the world, but like very unique places. So he was spending like 6 months living in the South Pole in Antarctica. He's like a physician's assistant, and he uses this job to get him to like random corners of the world and in the medical field. And so he was like working on a base down in Antarctica, living there. And so his kind of mission is to see these far off corners of the world. And he's not doing it as a digital nomad or a sponsored traveler. He's like, or a blogger or something. He's literally in the medical field and using that to get his ticket around the world. And like, I'm really inspired by those people.
That is really cool. I find that awesome.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. I mean, you're running a business now, which we're going to definitely get into, and you have a vantage point that shows you all these different ways that people are figuring out their means to see and explore parts of the world that weren't available to us years ago. It used to be a decision kind of between work and this adventurous lifestyle, and I guess we're seeing those two blend together now, huh?
Exactly. I think that now that people can work a lot more remotely as well, it has just opened up a lot of places. And I've actually still never been to Antarctica, topping on that note. And so I haven't been to the 7th continent, purely because I could never justify the cost of it. And I was working in finance and banking at the time. And so I didn't want to justify not only the cost, but the time of a couple of weeks, I guess, to be able to go down there and see it. And even 10 or so years ago, it was a massive cost. And you can even do that more affordably now. Add in the whole remote working side of things. And in some ways, yeah, everything's become a lot more accessible. In the early 2000s, I guess low-cost airlines and budget airlines were the ones that did that and opened the door to it. But now, in many ways, tech and that ability for remote work has taken it to another level.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to get into Holiday Swap with you before we but before we get there, because I think we'll probably end up spending a ton of time on that. I'm super curious to hear more about your origin story as a traveler a little bit, just because if I piece some things together right, it seems like you had a very, what most people would call a successful career going for them early on. And you were one of those people that kind of had to make a decision between continuing down that path and going in a different path. So I would love if you could kind of connect the dots between your pre-career and early career days and how you made this transition into, okay, now I'm going to go for this. I'm going to go see every country in the world. And then eventually we can get back to sort of where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I went into investment banking and started at HSBC straight out of university, college. It was something I wanted to do. I kind of got fixated on it, I guess, when I was maybe 16 years old or 17. I had a teacher at school who used to be a trader and investment banker, and it looked really cool. And I remember he came in with a bunch of guys from Merrill Lynch with the squeezy bulls that were their kind of mascot logo. And a bunch of my friends cut the bull's ear off and one of his legs, and it really upset me at the time. But I remember looking at that thinking, you know, I want to be in investment banking. And it just seemed cool to me. So I went straight into that in the middle of the financial crisis. And, even the first couple of days saw a lot of people losing jobs. And it was crazy at the time. And I had no idea what I was doing. But I was chucked in at the deep end, and opportunities, I guess, came my way quite nicely. But a lot of the stereotypes, we say, of the industry are very much true. And it's difficult to walk away from because, the money can be good and it's maybe not so much so now. And I'd never tell someone to do or not to do a job, but it's a difficult one. But I was doing it for a while, and I was managing a pretty big portfolio at a young age and got headhunted a couple of times by a couple of banks and went up the chain, I guess, quick. But it got to a point, I always remember a conversation I had with a guy, and I must have been 23, 24 at the time. And I had a great first boss. He said he'd cover me if I just, kept going and went to every country in the world, which began to become an ambition as I went into this job, and I was paying off credit card debt from the travels when I was at university. And he said, look, just go do it. I'll cover you as much as I can. And you never really hear that in investment banking because you're tied to your desk, especially as a young junior guy. The respect I have for this guy, Rob, he was my first boss, is insane. And he was actually jumping ahead, the first investor in the company who just formed such a strong bond. But kind of skipping back to it, he was a big part of being able to do that. But I remember this conversation with this random guy who came up and said, James, what you've done is inspiring, traveling to all these countries. And I didn't really think it was at the time. I was just doing my own thing. And he said, what the hell are you doing? Sitting at a desk in an investment bank. And I said, I love this. I love what it is. And I genuinely did. He said, just make a bit of money and get out and do something and travel. And the issue I had was I didn't have the idea of what to do in travel. And I think that too many people make that mistake now and we get told it online and on the internet that everyone can be a successful entrepreneur and everyone can hit their dreams. The harsh reality is that's just not the case. And I didn't want to fall into that trap. And it took me a couple of years until I actually had an idea that I turned around and said, you know what, light bulb moment, that's something that I could walk away from banking tomorrow. And I did, and set up this company and stick with it until the end, through the difficult times, through the crap that's thrown at you, which again, a lot of people give up, and it gets so tough that you need to stick with something that you're not turning back from. So I knew it had to be that, not just, hey, I want to do this and have this life. And it's not a glamorous life at all. Founding a company and being a CEO, it's 7-day weeks for the last 4 or 5 years and 18-hour days, sometimes more, all sorts of time zones. And I love it, but it's not for most people. And I think that that's sometimes the advice that people need to hear is there's no problem waiting to do it until you have something you're not going to turn back from. Because, unfortunately, all these motivational speakers, and I say that in inverted commas online, saying, don't sit in a miserable job, go do what you want to do. But actually, I think that's really poor advice. I think better advice is sometimes you have to sit there and graft to have the ability to do what you want to do, not only because you've got the right idea, but because you've got the comfort, confidence, whether that's financially or in a strong kind of, you've got enough runway of capital, should we say, to be able to stick with the business or whatever it is you want to do through those tough times. So I certainly waited till the time was right and walked away from banking. And I was pretty senior as an executive director at a bank at that time, still in my late 20s. And, some people would think it was crazy, but I had this idea. I wanted to actually make travel cheaper and more affordable. And so before then, I was getting asked by the press and the media, and it was kind of snowballing with the world record of people saying, hey, how do you travel so much? We'd love to do it too. How can we travel cheaper? And I actually used to trade the bonds and the debt of a lot of the travel companies in the travel sector, the airlines, the aircraft manufacturers, the likes of Expedia and all of these guys. So because I was, FCA registered, I couldn't say anything because it would be a conflict of interest. So I was just sat there with my mouth shut for a couple of years. Had the media knocking on the door asking, and I couldn't do anything. And I said, I want to be able to use that, but actually be able to answer the question, say, hey, this is how you can do it cheaper. And when I had the idea, I just kind of walked away the next day and said, this is what I'm doing, starting Holiday Swap.
That's fascinating, man. That's such a cool story to see how those dots can be connected. Yeah, you know what I find is super interesting is when people do actually use their quote unquote boring job, let's just call it that, people who have gone into accounting or investment banking or being the doctor, or the physician's assistant, the traditional jobs that we all think we're going to go get. And then they use that to parlay it into some form of adventurous lifestyle like you've done. I think a lot of people can connect with that because they've gone through the early stages of their life thinking this is what they're going to have to do. And I don't even know that they're doing it begrudgingly. I also, for instance, studied in finance and went into that finance, insurance, and this sort of world thinking like I wasn't disliking it at all at the time. But it also wasn't my dream life. I mean, I knew I wanted to travel and explore and do other things, but I just didn't really think that was possible. And then to see some of those skills, connections, and learnings that I had from that chapter of life progress into what I'm able to do today, it's pretty awesome to connect those dots. And I think actually this is one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast and tell the stories of people like yourself, because that can be inspiring for people who are sitting there at their day job right now, listening to this and going, okay, cool. I can take this and I can utilize it to go off and do the things that I truly want to do.
Yeah, and I think that actually which sounds really harsh and kind of negative on the surface, but I think one of the best pieces of advice that a lot of people can hear is that you're not extraordinary. And I know that sounds a bit odd to say. Everyone is at some point, but there's too much content online of these, as I say, these mastermind. They're getting paid for some course or whatever it is to promote it. And being sold a dream of, becoming a millionaire and a multimillionaire or a billionaire from NFTs or crypto, or join my mastermind course and you're going to get absolutely no new information that's not already everywhere online, and quit your boring job and do this. Or whether it's in real estate, say, you can put 0% down and everyone can be a landlord and everyone can make money. But the reality is, from a mental health perspective, that is so unhealthy for most people who might be sitting there reasonably content with their life, whether it's in insurance or whether they're in legal or whether they work in McDonald's or whether they work in a bar like I did, or I worked in a balloon shop to start with, blowing up balloons. And I was an idiot. I didn't even know how to use the pump. So I'm sat there blowing up all these big balloons manually. But you know what? I did it with a smile on my face and I was pretty happy. And once you get to a point where you get kind of brainwashed to thinking that you're a failure by doing that and that you can do so much more, you're chasing this dream that for a lot of people isn't there, and it crushes you, and you might lose the best years of your life in your 20s and 30s by chasing something, or even in your 50s, 60s. But once you have that amazing dream and ambition, then you maybe want to go and deal with it. And I'm allowed to swear, right?
Yeah, go for it. Be yourself.
Just so much shit is going to get thrown at you when you're trying to do something by yourself or have this dream and ambition, that it does break a lot of people. Whereas some of the happiest people I know just do something humbly. Actually, you know what? I'll tell you an example. There's a guy that I know in Geneva, and I remember we were having some drinks. This was maybe 6 months ago, and there were just these couple of Americans who thought they were billionaires in real estate, owning half of Miami Beach, sitting there just being arrogant. And my buddy is the nicest guy. He comes along. I hadn't seen him for a couple of years. He's got this big smile on his face. He says, "James, I've finally done it." And I said, "What?" And he goes, "I finally quit. I've started up my own driving instructor school." He always wanted to teach people and be a driving instructor. So he got his car modified. He got 2 sets of pedals, etc. And these guys, these American guys, were like, "Is that it? Like, are you going to expand? Are you going to buy more cars and hire people and turn it into a big business?" And he said, "No, like at the moment, I make money. I pay the bills. I'm really happy. I'm teaching people." And they kind of looked down on him. And I said, "Do you know what? This guy's probably a lot happier than you. He's done something and followed his dream. Not everything has to be this, global business." And it's a bit, again, hypocritical, should we say, that I'm saying that, because I guess what we built and what we have to build at Holiday Swap is really quite global. But I didn't do it until that idea really hit me like a light bulb. And so for so many people, I think that the happiness is actually maybe doing what you're doing. And every day at your work, if you're, as you say, like in insurance, may not be the happiest day. Sometimes you do go in and you make a salary and you pay the bills, but you work towards something, whether it's that vacation or, whether it's going and doing something really nice on the weekend. But not everyone can be spectacular and extraordinary on paper like we're told to now. But actually in yourself, that is pretty extraordinary and spectacular, because just doing your thing, I have so much respect for. And honestly, I have a lot more respect for people that do that and do a career job than someone that's turning around talking about their NFT collection or something. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think I don't know if this makes me old or something, but I mean the Instagram age of doing everything for doing it for the gram and showing pictures of where you're traveling to or how successful you are, I think is so toxic for our mental health, as you already alluded to. And that story of your friend with the driving school reminds me. Have you ever heard of this? There's like a kind of like a parable or something. It's about the Mexican fisherman. Have you heard this?
I think so, but please go.
I mean, so it's kind of the exact same story. It's like, and oddly enough, it's the antagonist in the story is an American businessman as well. So I guess we really are a-holes. So anyway, basically it's like this Mexican fisherman sitting there, and every day he's on the beach, and this American businessman is there, and he's like, "Oh, what do you do?" And he's like, "Oh, every day I go out and I go fishing with my friends. We catch a few fish and we come in, and then I spend the rest of my day hanging out with my kids, playing the guitar and having a beer on the beach with my family and friends." And the guy's like, "Oh, well, are you planning on expanding?" And he's like, "Well, why would I expand?" He's like, "Well, here's what you need to do. You need to buy a fleet of boats. You can take out a loan to do that. My bank will offer it to you. You can take out a loan. You can expand your fleet. You'll have to work really hard for like 20 years and take on a lot of debt." And so anyway, they go back and forth through these series of questions about what it would look like. And then the Mexican guy gets to the end and goes, "Okay, but what will it look like in the end?" And he goes, "Well, in the end, you can retire, you can hang out on the beach, play with your kids, and have a beer and play the guitar with your buddies on the beach." It's
and
like,
then you're old.
He's already there, Yeah. Yeah, and then you're old. Yeah.
It reminds me so much of being in Tonga as well. Exactly the same. In Tonga, like people are just sitting there in their front lawns, everything. You accidentally drop like a pip from an apple and it will probably be an apple tree a couple of days later. Obviously, that's an exaggeration, but they've got all of this amazing fruit that they need. They've got all the fish in the sea, that they're living the life, and everyone there will say it, and they're all smiling, and it's fantastic. And it's about your perception and your opinion of what you want in terms of that and that success. And I think that we're driven too much to see that we should be doing something. And, that's the great thing and the problem, as you say, like it was an American a-hole again, but it's the great thing and the problem, I guess, with the American dream is that it encourages you to do it, but then it does work towards, then you can kind of happily retire and enjoy it. And I do also remember when I was working in banking, one of my friends from the US came and moved to London for a bit for his job and moved in with me. And there's not one that's necessarily better than the other, but there's such a love affair between Americans coming to London and the UK and vice versa. British people love going to the US. And I think that the issue is so many Americans that I know that come and move to the UK sit there and love it to start with, because again, it is so 9 to 5 p.m. comes. It doesn't matter kind of what career job or how successful you are. It's almost like down tools. That's it. Assuming you work in an office and you go to the pub and have a beer. And that's kind of quite unheard of in many places, particularly in New York's or San Francisco's of the US, where it's just work harder and harder to get up. And there isn't that in the UK. So it's great to start with, and you don't kind of have your just strict 2 weeks vacation a year. But then when it becomes apparent that that really is life, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, have some beers, and there's not really any career progression from it. In a lot of instances, it's the longer you work, maybe you get a promotion. And so there's a lot more kind of career drive, I think, in Americans than wanting to have that. So it lasts for a bit and then it wears off. And then the same from British people going to the US is that anything and everything seems possible. And that's not the British mentality. The British mentality is more, you come and turn around and say, "Hey, I want to build this fleet of fisherman boats." You'll get told in the UK, "Well, you'll never be able to do that. Just, settle down. Just don't even bother. You'll never succeed." And so neither is better than the other, but it kind of shows the differing, I guess, more leftist social side of Europe versus the more we can do anything and everything in the US. So maybe there's more of a middle ground. I think that, again, tech and social media amplify people thinking that should be doing something that necessarily they shouldn't. It should be everyone to just be comfortable and not think, hey, I'm missing out on this because I see someone that looks apparently successful.
Yeah. It's so funny you mentioned that love affair with crisscrossing the Atlantic there. When I mentioned that I stayed in the finance and insurance space, it was literally the only thing that kept me there was because there was this tight affiliation and opportunity to work with a company that worked with Lloyd's of London in London. And I was very attracted to just exactly that. And my first time going to London in this space, I remember we went out and it was just completely mind blowing to me that we had beers and wine throughout lunch. And then at the end, like went back to Lloyd's and we're like, people were signing off on giant, $1 million policies and stuff. And it was just mind blowing to me as coming from the more like kind of stiff American business mentality. I absolutely loved it. So that love affair is absolutely true.
Nice. And it's an amazing office as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it's spectacular. I mean, it's a lot of fun. Like I said, I didn't dislike that time, that chapter of my life at all. I mean, it was actually a lot of fun for what it was. But moving on to a bit more adventurous, getting out of the New Yorks and Londons of the world and into the Tongas seemed a bit more exciting.
I think it's as Baz Luhrmann said. He said, living New York once, living California once.
Yeah, there's a good life to be had there, at least for some and for a while. I think it's really interesting you brought up that you mentioned the American dream, and I kind of wonder about that sometimes, like coming from the British mentality, and like you've obviously had a successful career and you've been in, deep into the finance and economics world. I mean, what do you think when you hear that the American dream? Does that seem valid anymore to you, or is it just something that people throw around? Is there something unique about the US? Because I asked for two reasons. One, because of your background, obviously. Two, I also saw somewhere where you really enjoyed, of all the countries in the world that you've seen, the US is one of the ones that sounds like you have an affinity for. So just curious to hear about your perspective on the US. I think it's always I'm obviously American, but it's always a polarizing country in a lot of ways, and you get people who have very strong opinions one way or the other. It's constantly in the media no matter where you go.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just be curious to get your perspective. This episode is brought to you by my good friends over at Greenback Tax. As an American citizen, I'm from one of only 2 countries in the entire world that requires I pay taxes on my global income, regardless of which country I'm actually living in. So when I started my expat journey back in 2015, I knew my tax situation was about to get complicated. Fortunately, I discovered Greenback and I've never looked back. Greenback is 100% focused on helping U.S. expats with their tax situation. And to date, they've filed almost 50,000 returns for nearly 15,000 happy customers from more than 200 different countries. After 7 years working together, I can say with confidence that they make one of the most painful parts of life abroad an absolute breeze with their automated systems, friendly advisors, and expertise in the very specific niche of U.S. expat taxes. Also, for those of you who may have fallen behind on your taxes or you're trying to get ahead of tax season in 2023, Greenback has your back here as well. They can assist with late filings to ensure you don't encounter any problems with the IRS and to make sure you start 2023 off right. Tax season is on the horizon. Learn more about Greenback today by going to greenbacktaxservices.com via the link in the show notes. Hey guys, if you're still around and enjoying this episode, then I think you might actually like our once a month newsletter as well. If you'd like to sign up, just open up the show notes of the episode you're currently listening to, scroll down, and look for aboutabroad.com/newsletter. It takes about 30 seconds to sign up. It's a fantastic way to support the show, and I think you'll be pleased with the information that we provide every month as well. Thanks a lot for listening. Hope you enjoy the rest of the episode.
Yeah, well, it's a funny one. I try not to talk about politics and religion as two things, but I spend a lot more time in the US than I do in the UK now, for sure. But the odd thing about that is if I was to be in a bar or a restaurant and have a strong opinion on something, the very instant reaction in the US and kind of US first is, if you don't, when they hear my accent is, well, if you don't like it, leave. And the reality is it's a country built on immigrants. Everyone's an immigrant in the US, and that's a great thing. That's what makes the country fantastic. But then, it shouldn't be a right that someone gets to say this country's great or this country's bad, depending on who's in the White House or who is there. And a country doesn't turn bad or great in 4 years when it kind of flips between either side, shall we say. So I think that the whole thing and the whole concept in the US is based on America's great because the American dream is there. Anything is possible. Anyone can make it. But I do feel like it's an aged dream in many ways, and one that isn't as relevant now. And I think that technology's kind of poisoned it a little bit to the point where it's become unhealthy at this stage in many ways. And again, I love the US so much because of the diversity in one country. You know, if you look at maybe Brazil, for example, its beach, its rainforest, the culture is very similar throughout the country. Whereas the differences between Hawaii or Alaska or, you know, somewhere like Colorado or Utah, which are beautiful, and then the coasts from California to New York and everything in between, the diversity is fantastic. But without kind of going too deeply into it, I think that the American dream in itself is something that is struggling. And again, it's no better necessarily. I sound like such a pessimist. I don't think it's any better in the UK. You know, it's a massive state there, but yeah, sometimes I do feel like social media is a massive blame to a lot of this, where the kind of someone being happy and content in what they do may not be enough in society's eyes anymore. And there's a lot of kind of judgment to that. I'm part Greek, and I go to Greece and you see someone that's for the last 30, 40 years worked in their taverna and their restaurant, and they love it. And they're just, you know, they're doing their thing. And you turn around and say, wow, this is such a great spot. And I have respect for that when I see it. And I'm almost like, you know, bowing down, hallowed turf. I'm like, you have such a great spot here. It's almost an honor for me to be there. And I feel like in some places of the world, it might not be seen as enough anymore. And I think that's kind of a shame.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting point about how the changing landscape of work is sort of like a shot in the foot in a way in the US. Like it's interesting. It's an interesting paradox, right? Because Silicon Valley is like the birthplace of tech in a lot of ways. And you have all the major tech companies being based there. And then at the same time, you have this technological revolution where, you know, remote work is becoming the new norm. And for those knowledge workers out there. And so it's decentralizing that. And the US has been sort of at the heart of the economy with in that sense, with Silicon Valley being at the heart of the national economy in that way. And so now that decentralization is sort of like it's changing it very quickly. And I don't know, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, it's the democratization of opportunity and people across the world having access to the same types of jobs that once were only centralized in those few places. So yeah, I'm personally curious to see how it's going to play out over time.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that, you know, and again, try not to get into politics. I don't think that the policy of any one country first is beneficial, even to a country that might be kind of top of a leaderboard, if you wanted to rate it like that. I've always been an advocate for globalization. I've always been an advocate for the ability for people that want to prove it or go and do whatever it might be to be able to do that. And, you know, in a way that, and again, without going into, does that mean open borders or saying, and again, there's many problems with that, why that wouldn't be the case. I'm not suggesting that. But the illustration you could play on is, for example, in the UK and the UK leaving the EU. And even as of today, with elections in Italy, it looks like Italy is now making a very big push to leave the EU as well. And it really does look like an accelerated construction of the European Union. And it's taken actually a very big move towards that as of today, which didn't seem possible a couple of years ago. And yet, you know, you can look at the EU as the US, for example. It doesn't, the EU sticking together or one country wanting more control over X, Y, Z policies, whether it's monetary, fiscal, whatever it might be, isn't good. Like, you know, global trade and globalization is something that allows everyone to push together more. And the EU just cutting itself off and saying we are big, we're flexing our muscles, same as the US, isn't necessarily right. But I do very much feel kind of the better together and the openness and the globalization is so much more beneficial for developing countries and for countries themselves that are able to kind of construct that, having individual country agreements and trade. I know the UK is now trying to put a bigger trade agreement together with the US because it needs to, because it's now literally turned into exactly what it is, which is a little small island, you know, by itself, just kind of sitting there in the Atlantic. It's not going to work for that in itself. And again, I think this is probably the most I've ever talked about policy or politics or anything to in any kind of chat I've ever had. I know I said I try not to, and then I just dived into it, but it's crazy how it's more relevant than ever.
Well, I'm sorry I dragged you down that path, and I didn't intend to either. So I won't keep you there for too long. I think it's interesting. There's this analogy that I heard, totally unrelated to politics and global economics, but sort of it works. Like there's this concept that's like you can build if you're a house in a neighborhood, you're building the biggest mansion in the neighborhood, but the neighborhood around you is being deteriorated because you're building this giant mansion. Then, that doesn't do, what's that going to do to your property value over time? So this is the idea that, we should be thinking more globally in general and how we can, help elevate the betterment of the planet, not just our individual countries or cities or in this case, the mansion in the neighborhood. So hopefully more people will be thinking that. Maybe it's, travel is one of the best forms of education in the world. You've had the ability to see obviously every single country in the world. So maybe your perspective, that experience changes your perspective. Whereas like a lot of our compatriots haven't had the chance to even leave their postal code or certainly the country. I know people love to throw out the stat to me. There's some percentage, like what is it? 30% of Americans don't have passports, and, I don't know. I never really know how true that is or whatnot, but
yeah, no, I definitely agree. Travel was 100% the best education that I ever had. And after my first year, I didn't turn up to a single lecture or class again at a university studying maths and economics. I just came back for the exams and slept on a beanbag to catch up on the year. And when I say I slept in the library, I literally slept in the library. I had a beanbag and there was a shower there. I had a little bag and was essentially homeless because I'd got rid of my rental on my apartment to go travel the world instead. And I remember my second year, I'd gone traveling with my best friends to Southeast Asia and we did some volunteering, building some homes in Vietnam. And I never thought I'd pick up the travel bug. And I can literally picture it today, this shop in London where I bought the backpack from and these guys in the store saying, oh, you'll get this one because you'll pick up the travel bug, you'll love it, and this will last you for years. And I was thinking, yeah, whatever, this is a one-off trip. I'm going to Southeast Asia, having a bit of fun, doing some good stuff, volunteering. And I came back from that trip and I was desperate to travel again. And I remember my first lecture of my second year, everyone around me saying, hey, are we going to go to this bar and do that? And I had a great first year. I did everything that you think you'd do in your first year and just have fun and was a bit of an idiot. And I remember closing up my book and just saying, no, I'm not doing this again in my second year. It really did. Studying maths and economics really didn't teach me anything that I have ever used in the real world. Now, when I studied it when I was kind of between 16 to 18, it's almost more simplified. But I mean, the more simple stuff, but it is actually applicable to the real world. And I felt like the smartest I ever was on paper in a book was when I was kind of 17 or 18 years old, when I was learning more basic principles of economics, for example, but actually what a change in interest rates does. And people see interest rates going up at the moment. And the only related aspect it might have to people is what it might mean for their mortgage payments, for example, but without understanding what that does to the wider macroeconomic situation, which is actually kind of relatively simple to understand. But I had a better grasp of it when I was 17 or 18, rather than studying at, one of the top universities for economics, doing it from 18 onwards, where it didn't teach me anything that was really real world applicable. It was just how hard can we make it to prove that someone's really smart so they get a job on paper. And so I kind of ran away from that and did the travel thing. And I was thinking, this is teaching me so much more. So didn't turn up again. And then was this kind of homeless library dude.
I love how you go from a homeless guy in a beanbag in the library to running a global tech company and traveling to every country in the world. That is quite the jump from one end of the spectrum to the other. And I would love to dive into Holiday Swap a little bit and just talk about like what was the quick origin story, and then also, or maybe let's preface it with what Holiday Swap does and then revert back to the origin story, because I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So Holiday Swap is just almost, let's call it the travel Tinder, but instead of your face, it's your home, and people exchange homes. So the biggest cost of travel is accommodation. Even if you rent your home, exchanging it without kind of making money on that Airbnb, whatever website, I forget the name, is called. We're very different to that because it's really a community and a network and user to user, where you stay at mine and I stay at yours. And it's really as simple as that. So, we've had a pretty interesting run. Even during COVID, we were able to grow and kind of focus, I guess, more on people traveling domestically or regionally, and maybe someone swapping the city with the countryside, for example, and moving around within them to get a change of scenery, or people that are working remotely. But whether it's an asset or a liability, your apartment, your house, your villa, your spare bedroom, whichever one it is is really the kind of the biggest overhead that most of us will have. So why not be flexible using it? And that's really what Holiday Swap does. And the origins kind of relate to that. I was in a place called Cluj-Napoca. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I'd never heard of it. And this was after I'd been to every country. And I remember with one of my good friends, we booked a €10 flight there from London on Wizz Air. Less said about them, the better, but at least they open up a lot of countries cheaply. So we were there, and as my friends like to do in annoying situations, they'll be like, yeah, this guy's been to every country. And I get the same questions, what's your favorite, etc. And, I'm unofficially an ambassador for travel, and I'm more than happy to always answer it and be as positive as I can, because obviously, people want to travel more and amazed by it. So I remember this group of people in Cluj, which was voted the European Youth Capital of the World. It's in Transylvania and Romania. Again, I've never heard of it. I loved this city, though. It was so cool. And the European Youth Capital, they've got a bunch of colleges there, and people are really outgoing and want to travel. And this group of people that my friend said, this guy's been to every country. There's, particularly in Eastern Europe, there's an obsession with people wanting to come to London, and the royal family, etc. Would love to go, but we can't afford it. And my instant reaction is, of course you can. We flew here for just €10 on a 2.5-hour flight. It's affordable. You can do it. And they all said the same thing. They said it's not the flights, it's the accommodation. Even a shared hostel in a shared dormitory in central London is going to put you back $50, $60 a night, which is, a big financial cost for a shared dormitory. And I remember sitting there in that moment, and I joked, I said, well, look, I live in a decent place in London at the moment. I'm not there, I'm here, and I'm definitely coming back here. So next time I am, you can stay at mine in London. And they're like, can we take you up on that? And I was like, yeah, sure. Flying back to London the next day, looking out the window, and I was like, hang on, light bulb moment. Next day I set up Holiday Swap, and there was no looking back. I thought, look, actually people being able to kind of almost like a couch surfing on steroids, or a much cheaper version of Airbnb thing. That's what we wanted to do. And we said everyone can and should be using this, even if you don't necessarily go and say, right, type in, I want to go to New York on these dates. What's the cost? Filter by 3-star, 4-star hotel. What's the price? It might just be a case of you go on Holiday Swap and you've got your community of somewhere that you can stay in Sydney and Bangkok and Tokyo and London, Paris, Madrid, Miami, etc. And you might go there in 6 months or in 2 years. And it's just kind of always gives you that place that you can kind of go and stay. And liquidity in the home market is really what we do. And it's been quite a ride.
It's such a cool story. I'm such a massive fan of this concept. Anything that we can do to lower the barrier to entry for people that want to travel, and finances are normally the main blocker for people that have that desire. Anything we can do to lower that barrier is something I'm a huge fan of. And I've done some swaps in the past, and I've used like various platforms for different things, like trusted house sitters, for example, to bring people to watch my dog while I'm traveling, and they get to stay in my home for free, and I don't have to pay for pet sitting, which is like, yeah, it's such a crazy. When I was living, I've gotten spoiled by Spain prices now in this regard, but like there was a time, I think I was living in Miami at the time, I remember having to pay $70 a day for my dog to be watched. I mean, if you're gone for 10 days, $700, like that's insane.
Yeah.
And so, using platforms like that, platforms like Holiday Swap to exchange homes, so everybody's winning. You're not spending any extra. You're getting to stay in somebody's house. There's a mutual interest in respecting each other's homes. Yeah, I mean, this is people are doing this with vehicles now as well. I mean, there's some tools out there, and it's very cool to learn about Holiday Swap. So when did you guys start exactly? How long has it been around?
It's been around 4 years now. So and again, at the start, it's a case of having to really build and just have more and more homes, and people kind of trust us and see that platform growing is the key thing, because to be kind of at a point that I guess was critical mass, you need to be global. It's not really like we could go and start up in one country and be successful, because the problem, and this kind of almost comes back to tech and social media and the bigger giants, I guess, even from Silicon Valley, is most people that are grafting hard with a startup and are a founder, eventually they've got so many no's and doors closing that once there is that element of success, they quickly get bought and mopped up. I mean, even look at it with Instagram, with Facebook buying them, and Instagram is arguably much more successful and bigger than Facebook in many ways now. But, that was just a couple of guys that started that. They got taken out for $1 billion, which is very cheap now, looking at it relatively. And so the problem you have with a lot of things that are successful that are difficult to really kind of jump to being, I guess, global, is that as soon as they show that traction success, they do get taken out. And most people are kind of motivated by, okay, I can succeed with that and start up another company. Whereas I think for us and the team, it's really, we're taking this all the way to the end. And from the couple of people that have approached us to buy us in the past, it's not really been my objective. And I think that kind of, I guess, the past life in investment banking, it is nice to have given me that, because I was able to self-fund the company to start with. Then we got investors in at a certain stage, but money's never been the motivator for me. It's not, I don't need to or want to have a big amount in my bank account and sit on a beach. Right now, for example, I'm without trying to show off, I'm working remotely looking out the sunset in the Maldives. I got a couple of days here, but it's the perfect life for me. Yeah, sure, it's still 17, 18-hour days most days. It's crazy weird times with people in Australia and the US, and I love it. And it's not for everyone. It is for people if you have that true passion, but it's because we know where we want to take this. And it's not a case of I'm sitting here waiting for the phone to go and someone say, right, we're going to put a few zeros in your bank account, move aside, we're going to take over a successful concept. We're really doing something here that I think makes a difference and adds value to people and saves them money and solves a problem that there's no reason why we want to do that. So I think that the path, and actually on that note, someone actually asked me the other day who was trying to raise capital for their business. They said, James, how did you do it with Holiday Swap? And I get asked that a lot because I guess that's been fairly successful for us, and we've kind of had a lot of growth and a lot of shareholder return. I said the honest answer is this started over 10 years ago. A lot of the people that were our first investors, because I never went down the VC route. I think that a lot of VCs aren't worth the paper they're written on, and think that they run things, but realistically they're just managing someone else's money and all of that. And again, a lot of startups think that when they get a VC that invests in them that they're successful, but the whole game changes and you get controlled by them. But that's a different topic in general. So even though we have VCs now, we didn't want to go down there at the very start. And so the first investors that came on with us were people that I used to trade with and against in investment banking. Almost some of them rivals, should we say. But I guess I always made a statement in how I did things. And I guess my word was my word. If I quoted someone a price on something, that was the price. I'd stand up to it. There were days where I'd lose a lot of money doing it. Sometimes get asked to change my style. But I guess my style was as much integrity and honesty as I could have. And it served us well at the start of the company because it's people that I guess knew what I was going to be about and how I was going to do it. And that's now our whole wider team. They all think and do the same. And it's bigger than, hey, here's a bit of paper, here's a projection chart. You want to invest and I'll make you all of this money. It's a lot more because a lot of people will fail with it. A lot of people might lie with it. And it's about being as honest as you can. So it's something that I guess I set out to kind of stick to those morals and that integrity years before Holiday Swap. And I guess I wouldn't say luckily, but thankfully it served us kind of well on that journey. So kind of looping the whole thing back in, I think that not only if people have something that they are so intent that when times get tough, they're going to stick with, but a lot of the time, I think people that are successful, their journey starts way, way before. And sometimes it's digging on that, whether it's something that you're so specialized or passionate in.
Yeah. I mean, people that don't work in the tech industry may not be able to understand just what a unique situation that puts you in the tech world. I'm fortunate enough. I work at a bootstrap startup, my full-time job at a company called Doist, and we've never gone the VC route. Our CEO doesn't have an exit strategy. The idea is to build a 100-year company and for all of us to play a part in that. And that's very unique. I mean, it's using the word unicorn a little bit differently than we use it normally with billion-dollar valuations, but you do become kind of a unicorn in this space, and I think are very unique. You're not the norm because you haven't gone in the traditional VC route. And I think to do that, the reason I mention all that is because I think you have to have a very strong why in order to make that work. If your why isn't all the zeros in the bank account, then there has to be something else there. It's very clear to me that Holiday Swap was a passion project for you, something that was connected to your identity as a world traveler and wanting to give this opportunity to people around the world. And that seems to be where it comes from. I would love to hear from you if that resonates with you. Maybe you say, no, that sounds like a bunch of bullshit, Chase. But if that resonates with you, I would love to hear you kind of articulate what your why is and what's motivating you to go this route with Holiday Swap.
No, I completely resonate with it. I really do. And the why is, I think, as I said, it's wanting to actually open up the world to more people. It kind of connects in the conversation we had before about how I think and feel about globalization and people being connected. And, again, it can sound, I guess, a bit fluffy to say, but we are so similar. I remember being 18 and, sat in Vietnam on tiny little chairs when we were building homes. And every time we walk home, all the locals were inviting us for more and more dinners in their homes. And we were so full up, but it was kind of rude to say no. We're having these little cans of beer in this really rustic town. Monsoon was hitting. One of the guys got something hit him in the balls. He's holding them, dropping to his knees in pain. And I remember everyone's laughing. We couldn't speak a word of Vietnamese to these people, and they couldn't speak a word of English, and we're all laughing still. And it's so many things like that. It doesn't matter language, culture. Some things are just the same in every language. And I remember that moment there was we are so similar in many ways. It doesn't matter if you're Vietnamese, Scottish, Americans, African, Chinese, whatever it is. That's just the same to everyone. That was kind of quite an interesting moment. But it is because to connect and to save money. And I guess I can't say too much about it, but the other real passion, obviously, in interloping with all of that is aviation. And we've got to a point now where we've actually branched off in a subsidiary and doing some stuff in aviation with aircraft, and that's so exciting. There's a lot I could say.
Similar concept, swapping. No, okay.
Very, very different. Changing the game and kind of bringing back what aviation used to be, rather than getting a peanut or something and getting barked at because you put your wheels on your bag the wrong way round in the overhead or something. So that is exciting. So I guess look out for that. But the last few years, I'm not the most traveled, and I'm certainly not. My actual travel side of things is incredibly boring. I might be in the Maldives or in New York or wherever, and I don't do anything touristy. I never get a chance to really immerse myself into any culture at all anymore. It's either somewhere head down, remote working, but being lucky enough to be in a beautiful place where kind of my mind's in a good place, or moving around for meeting after meeting after meeting. So my main thing is I live on a plane. So plane-wise, even in 2020 and 2021, when no one was really traveling, I was still taking over 200 flights each year international. And that's my home is on a plane. So bringing it in and filtering in from the wider travel side, aviation is really the one. And so I felt like a kid again with what we're doing there. But again, it's only been allowed and I guess afforded to happen by us having our heads down and really pushing on with Holiday Swap. And it will complement it because, the biggest cost of travel is accommodation. And the next biggest is your tickets and transportation. Kind of combining the two. Yeah, I'm excited.
Oh man, it's very, very cool. I look forward to watching those things intertwine. I know I've only got you for a few more minutes. You're a busy man. I got 1 hour out of your 17 to 18 hour workday, which I'm super, super grateful for. So thank you for all this.
Thank you, Chase. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
It has been my pleasure. Before I let you go, I just want to ask you a couple very quick questions just to share a little bit more information on Holiday Swap for people. Real quick, rough number of homes and countries that you guys are in, just to give people an idea about the breadth.
Yeah, we're in 184 countries now, and we got over 3 million users. So it's our ambitions, I guess, within the next 6 months, we really want to scale at this point, and we're looking to hit 10 million users. We want to offer more and more options, more homes from everything from, even boats, which we've had some of those on the platform, and from everything villas to, one beds and studios and rooms. And it's everything and anything that it should and you want it to be. And it's just about affording more and more options for people. I think one of the things, if we're looking really critically at ourselves as well, is the kind of last minute aspect, because money always talks as well. And if you go on a hotel site or homestay platform, should we say, it's easy to put some money on the table and stay last minute if you're in a city. And I think that the more options that we have, it becomes more possible for that to happen. And we certainly want to be people's main go-to for that, because again, the saving of the money and the more options just helps with more users.
Fantastic. And do people need to do simultaneous swaps, or is there some form to allow people to travel to someone's home? Maybe someone's got a second home or something like that.
Yeah, not anymore, actually. It used to be direct swapping. And again, as you can probably tell, there's kind of big barriers to that. You really need to be at a big enough stage. So a lot of people still do directly swap, and that's really nice community-wise. But we've got tokens in the platform now, not in a crypto way, but it allows people to earn tokens. You can value your place per night. 50, 100, 200 tokens. A token is worth $1. And so you can receive that in your account and you can use them to go stay somewhere else. So you could stay with that person on mismatched dates, maybe if it's a second home, or you could come stay at mine and I get the tokens and then I can use them to stay with someone else if I'm not coming to your place. So the tokens really kind of are the lifeblood of allowing more exchanges and between 3-way exchanges or 4-way or whatever it might be to really happen.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. Where can people go? We'll put this all in the show notes as well. Where can people go to sign up? And is there like a free trial or anything that people should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the app stores, Apple App Store and Google Play Store, and or you could help the website. And yeah, you can get a couple of week free trial, but you can also get, I don't even know the exact number, which I should probably fire myself for, but I think it's about $200 worth of tokens if you add your home, and obviously you can earn from that already tokens and use it to go and exchange. I think, there's a few steps that if you verify your account, which everyone will want to do because it's just another level of trust. But I think it's about $200 worth of tokens, which you can go and use immediately to go stay somewhere as well on it. If you just go sign up for free and complete those steps. So you don't need to be, even subscribed on a trial. Usually users get the most and get the best and first available properties from doing it, but you can do it without and go and already be earning those tokens. If you go and list your place up there, it's the best way to do it.
Fantastic. I mentioned this earlier, but I'm a big fan of the concept. I've done some swaps. It's great to see this being formalized in a place where, you have those verifications in place, and it's not like a friend of a friend or so. I mean, you're actually providing the platform so that people can do these and feel safe about it. And you can see the property that you're going to, and it solidifies everything. And I absolutely love what you're doing. So thanks for innovating on this space that we're all passionate about if we're listening to this. And thank you again for your time. And I wish I got a million other questions about every country in the world that you've been to, but we'll have to save that for another time. And so anyway, thank you again, James.
Should we do another one, Chase? I've loved this.
I believe so. What's funny is I wasn't going to ask you the standard question about, what was your favorite country, but I did have one question about a particular country that I saw that you visited. And so we'll have to we'll save that for round 2.
You sure we could squeeze it in maybe?
Oh, if you've got time, I'm game.
Yeah, let's squeeze it in.
All right. I'm not going to say the name of it. I want to know about the very last country that you visited, which was, you visited every single country in the world, which don't quote, what are there, like there's 280 or something? I can't remember the number. So maybe the last country that you went to. I want to know kind of how that became the last country, where it was, and what a quick little overview of what your experience was like there.
The last one was Micronesia in the middle of the South Pacific. Reason why the South Pacific countries were the furthest away from me in the UK at the time and pretty expensive to fly around them. And when I was kind of at college and doing overlanding through Africa and overlanding through South America, it was easier and cheaper to plan it. And so, yeah, I'd kind of saved up money from working multiple jobs and thought I was some hotshot investor at 18 and made a bit of money in the financial crisis to pay for it. But I was at the same time self-funding it, so kind of running out of money or in some credit cards. And I guess when I moved into finance and I was still trying to squeeze in as much as I could on the time I had off, the more expensive ones were in the South Pacific moving around. So I guess I saved those till last when I could afford it from the job that I had. So that's probably the most platonic real reason why I did it. But I can actually picture today walking through immigration into the last country in Micronesia. And I felt really sad because it kind of been a part of me to do it for the last few years with this objective. And I walked through and I remember thinking, well, what now? It's not like I got like some fireworks or a fanfare or parade. And, again, it was certainly kind of pre-Instagram and pre-social media. So it's not like anyone's there to kind of say, wow, that's a great accolade. And I didn't go to the press with it. The press actually kind of found out and I shut off. I didn't want to do any interviews or anything with it. And, I didn't even set up an Instagram account. I think it took 2016 or 17. So I didn't want the exposure and that. And maybe I should have done, maybe I could have a Netflix show like Zac Efron or something. But, I was just kind of pretty happy to do my own thing at the time. And, looking back, it was a bit odd walking through there and thinking, what should I do now? And then honestly, I probably think I sat there for the next, 2 years, just churning along in my investment banking job and probably been a little bit lost, if I'm honest.
Yeah. I bet. I mean, there's something about the letdown after you cross the finish line that's a very real thing. I mean, in fact, in other aspects of life, it can send people into a really dark spiral trying to figure out, okay, what's next, you know? And it's very cool to see that you dovetailed that off into something that continues to motivate you, but that's, you know, not always the case for everyone.
It took me a while.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. And was the experience in the country in Micronesia a good one? I mean, I bet you if you ask the average person, they not only can't tell you exactly where it is, but like you couldn't identify, you know, what is it about Micronesia? What's the food or the culture like? Or, you know, they just probably don't have a really great picture in their head. So did you walk away with a positive experience?
Oh, incredible. All of the South Pacific Islands were just so different when you delve into how the culture is, and stunning and beautiful and very rustic in some ways. I remember trying to spearfish actually in Micronesia to catch my dinner, and I wasn't very good at it. But I've had some phenomenal memories in the South Pacific. In Tuvalu, which was probably my favorite there, they had one flight a week at the time. So again, I think some people that were trying to kind of do the passport stamp things were kind of on record for landing in and doing a complete 180, getting a stamp and flying out on the same flight and saying, I've seen the country. Now, again, each to their own. But for me, I stayed there a week. And, I remember landing and someone in the plane saying, there's the prison. And it was a tent with one person in there. Were no guards because everyone knows the one prisoner that was in there. And so it was like a throwback into a different era. And once that one flight leaves, the runway of the country, which takes up about probably a third of the whole country, is used as people. I remember having motorbike drag races up and down. People play football on it. They were playing volleyball and having nets up. And it was just insanely different. And then at night, because it's so hot and there's no aircon there, half the country drags their mattresses out onto the runway and sleeps there because you get the cool breeze that comes across it. And I will never forget how many stars I saw there. It's not even come close to seeing it. And being there thinking, this is just insane. It was incredible. Wow. So I look back at the South Pacific with really fond memories.
Oh, no wonder you walked away a bit nostalgic. What a way to end the journey. And it's going to be fun to continue to follow along where these next steps take you from here. James, I'll let you get back to the real world. Thank you again so much. That was a fantastic way to end an already awesome conversation. Really, really appreciate it.
Chase, I appreciate it so much. And thanks for inviting me to come on and have a chat. Awesome.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.